Before we dive into any organ system, it's important to introduce yourself to the overall functions of the system. What does this system bring to all of the other systems in the body? And you can see a quick list of 7 things here. Take a moment to read them because I'm not going to go through each one on this slide. But each of these overall functions is addressed in the mini lectures on the integumentary system. So after you've reviewed the mini lectures, you should come back to this slide and ask yourself what anatomical structures contribute to these overall functions. So what provides that protection? What excretion is it that the skin does? What is melanin, keratin, and vitamin D? What does skin store, right? What kind of sensors are in skin? And what immune coordination and thermoregulation is it capable of? Before we go any further, it's important to review those levels of organization from Chapter 1. We said that the body is made up of the 11 organ systems, and the integumentary system is one of them. Recall, organ systems are made up of organs, and skin, also called the cutaneous membrane, is one of those organs. Students often get confused here and think that the term integumentary system equals the skin, but the integumentary system is not just skin. It has hair, nails, sweat glands, and other associated organs. That being said, the skin, or the cutaneous membrane, is the organ on which we're going to spend the most time. The cutaneous membrane consists of 2 or 3 layers, depending on who you ask. If you ask me, it's 3. Well, I'll explain. The epidermis is also the hard candy shell. It's the most superficial layer of the cutaneous membrane. Underneath the epidermis, or the hard candy shell, is the dermis, which I once heard described as a gelatinous body stocking. That sounds quite disgusting to me, if you want my personal opinion. And then down here, there is the hypodermis, which is the layer that's in question. It's a layer of adipose fat, and it is not everywhere on your body. It's not on the posterior face of your hands. It's not on the superior face of your feet. And so some people don't consider the hypodermis to be an official layer of the cutaneous membrane. And of course, under here, we have a muscle. And then maybe even under that, we have a bone. You might be looking at the slide and thinking that I have a duplicate here, but I don't. The layers of the cutaneous membrane, epidermis, dermis, and possibly hypodermis, are names that are specific only to the cutaneous membrane, and thus why they get the name layer. But this slide is about the tissues that are found in the cutaneous membrane. You have to remember that there are only 4 tissues in the body: epithelial, connective, muscular, and nervous. Within these 4 categories, there are finite subcategories, right? So it's not everything. And those subcategories, we are continually addressing them in the lab portion of our course. So the epidermis is open to the outside, and thus it's made of an epithelial tissue because it lines an open space. The type of epithelial tissue that makes up the epidermis is called stratified squamous. Stratified because there are many layers, and squamous, which is a shape that kind of looks like an egg shape. So the name stratified squamous can be used in multiple places in the body where there is more than one layer of egg-shaped cells. Here, We can apply a more specific name to these stratified squamous epithelial cells, and we call them keratinocytes because these stratified squamous cells are filled with the waterproofing protein keratin. Okay, the dermis actually has 2 layers within it, both of which are connective tissues. The more superficial layer of the dermis contains areolar, which I don't know how to spell, areolar connective tissue. The deeper, larger layer of the dermis contains dense, irregular connective tissue. It's worthwhile to dig into the chapter in our book on tissues and also to revisit a lab where we may have addressed these tissues. As you may have guessed, the hypodermis is also composed of a connective tissue, and this would be adipose, connective tissue, CT. Be very careful on the quiz to read questions and note whether they're asking you for the layer or for the tissue. Let's first address the degree of burns and how they relate to the layers of the cutaneous membrane. I have suffered some pretty severe sunburns in my lifetime, having Scandinavian heritage. I am a pasty white and burn to a crisp when the sun hits my skin. I don't tan, I just go right to a burn. A little sunburn that you might get from the sun, a little burn that you might get from touching your finger to the hot part of the toaster. These are all first-degree burns, and they damage really only the epidermis. And it's not something that we concern ourselves about needing medical attention because the epidermis is constantly regenerating itself, and it will do so in time. Second-degree burns are so named because they reach down into the dermis. And there are 2 types of second-degree burns. This is what's significant here is because there are 2 places in the dermis where there are blood vessels. Blood vessels are necessary if you want to see any healing to the burn. If you want to make new cells, you're going to need glucose and oxygen to make the energy to do it. A very light 2-degree burn will burn away the more superficial network of blood vessels that's in the dermis. This type of burn still has the ability to regenerate because there's actually a deeper level of blood vessels that are still present. A deep 2nd-degree burn would burn the dermis completely, removing all of the blood vessels in the area. Depending on the surface area over which the burn extends, most tissue of the dermis is capable of regenerating given enough time. A 3rd-degree burn is also called a full thickness burn. And this is because it burns the entirety of the cutaneous membrane in a certain place. It removes the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis if present. I don't recommend that you look for pictures on full thickness burns, but if you do, just be prepared that you will see bone where you should not be seeing bone. The rule of 9s is used in assessing burn victims, and this rule takes the proportion of skin in an area and designates a percentage of coverage. So real quick, the face is 9%. Each arm is 9%. I think that's right. We'll figure out. Each arm is 9%. Each leg is 18%. 9% for the front and 9% for the back. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, here we go. And then we've got the chest of the body, which is also 18%. The one that's left over is the genitals, and I can't even put a 1 in there, but you know. Think for a moment about taking somebody's skin off and spreading it out on a table. And now put all the pieces together like a puzzle to make a shape that you can measure. By doing this, you're able to think of what percentage of the organ of skin has been damaged. For an example, in an adult, if the front of the lower leg is burned, that would be roughly 9% of the skin that is burned. I want you to think about other organs. Could you lose 9% of your heart muscle? No. Kidney? It depends if it's your last one or not. Liver? Most consider things critical when 25% or more of the skin surface has been burned. So like a leg and a little bit of an arm. People also consider any burns on the face, the posterior of the hand, and the tops of the feet. If you have burns in these areas, many people will also consider these to be critical. Those areas actually correspond to areas of the cutaneous membrane that don't contain the hypodermis. I have this little child here because if you get any percentage of burn on a child, it's considered critical, right? And even though it's a percentage, children have less fluid and less volume per surface area than adults have. So any burn on a baby can be considered critical.